Hey guys, what's up? It's Jules here for What Culture, and I've got some news for you, so it's time to hit that jingle.
It's time for the news with Jules! Yeah!
And I'm back in the room, and today I'm talking about Zack Snyder, or more importantly, his relationship with Warner Brothers and the DCEU. It turns out, as many of us know, when Joss Whedon came up to basically take over the reins for Zack on the filming of Justice League, we all thought that basically he had taken some time off to be with his family after his personal tragedy, which, was understandably pretty horrendous. Well, it turns out that maybe his split wasn't as amicable as first thought. As John Dickey, a Mashable writer, wrote on Twitter last night, "Since I'm shifting into don't give a fuck mode, here's a hot one for you. Zack Snyder was fired from the DCEU just over 1 year ago. Couldn't write it quite that way at the time, but was able to tap dance around it with a clumsy, oblique headline, which wasn't his, which said, Zack Snyder's future at Warner Brothers DC movies is uncertain at best." So, that's some big news. The fact that he was actually fired from the Justice League project rather than actually splitting to go home and deal with his personal tragedy, I'm sure that did play a huge thing in it. But it's interesting to note that this is one of yet another slew of directors being fired from studios because of personal issues or just clashing with them head on. Was it as simple as creative differences, or did Zack Snyder stick his heels in to basically get a vision of the Justice League on screen that Warner Brothers just weren't having? Who knows? We don't actually have that information, but it is so interesting to note that Warner Brothers and everyone else involved in this lied to cover the truth. Now, this man has gone through a personal tragedy, and I'm in no way lambasting him, but it's just so interesting that they would rather cover the fact that they are firing a director by allowing him to use his personal tragedy as the reason for it in the media spin, rather than just saying, we didn't get along, we're going to fire it, because at the end of the day, that would affect their money more. It shows that the studio didn't maybe have as much confidence as they would like you to believe in the Justice League to be able to say, no, we're letting go of one of the creative directors. So let's go through some of the reasons why Zack Snyder might have been let go. Now, it's quite famously noted that Warner Brothers had an issue with Zack Snyder from the off because his vision of Batman vs Superman and Man of Steel was actually much darker than they had originally intended. So it might have been that they let him go because his screenshots and things that he was trying to include in the film weren't as family friendly as maybe some of the other competitors, aka Marvel, were putting out in their sort of more colourful, family friendly romps. And I mean, when you do look at the Justice League, you can definitely tell which sections are Snyder's and which are Whedon's because of the fact that there is a huge tone shift throughout the film. Some are definitely more dark and, let's just say, out there compared to the other side, which is much more of a stereotypical superhero romp. Now, we all remember when the Justice League got its first early screening that critics tore it apart, so much so that that's the reason why Joss Whedon was brought in to do reshoots. Now, at the time, we thought, okay, that's Zack Snyder having to step away for his personal issues and Joss just coming in to tidy up a few loose ends. But it turns out, now that we know that he was fired, that was basically the studio saying, right, well, we need to fix this. Zack's vision just isn't clicking with the audience. We need to bring Joss Whedon in, and maybe that is the reason why he got fired. Another reason why he might have been let go is that his films haven't actually been as marketable and as profitable as you might be led to believe. Now, every single film that he's been attached to in the DCEU has turned a profit, and in my eyes, a mind-bogglingly large amount of money, seeing as, well, then again, I find 50p in my pocket quite a godsend. But anyway, when you actually look at how much he spent on the films versus what they actually got back, the figures don't actually add up. I've got the figures here, actually. So, Man of Steel and Batman vs Superman made more than 1.4 billion combined, but they cost 525 million to make, and that's without the marketing costs, which are just absolutely ginormous anyway. Now, that seems like a ridiculously large amount of money, but when you compare it to the likes of Jurassic World, the latest Fast and the Furious movie, and the Minions movie, all of which made over $1 billion, 875 million or whatever it is difference that they made just isn't enough for Warner Brothers, or could be a reason why he got fired. Because basically, when you look at Marvel's films versus the money they rake in versus the marketing, they are leagues ahead of them in terms of profits. Then we have to talk about the fact that maybe Snyder didn't actually understand what to do with Superman, or basically didn't even understand what his character was. Throughout the films, he basically deconstructed Superman much in the same way that Batman was done in The Dark Knight, but he never really built back up. Batman's arc was very clear. It was broken all the way down and rebuilt into something new. Whereas the Man of Steel arc that was going on, it was just kind of broken. I'm a little bit happy, but those were the bits that Whedon put in. So where Zack was going with that, no one really knows. And it would be understandable from a Warner Brothers perspective that you'd be annoyed that one of your blue chip brands is basically being destroyed in front of your eyes. So maybe that could have also been a factor. We've also got to consider that maybe Zack was never the right person to make a conventional superhero story, seeing as he himself said that he didn't like conventional, normal superhero stories. He gave an interview once. It was for, where was it? It was for Entertainment Weekly back in 2008. And he said, basically, I had a buddy who tried to get me into normal comic books, but I was like, no one is having sex or killing each other. This isn't really doing it for me. I was a little broken that way. So when Watchmen came along, this is way more my scene. And Watchmen isn't a conventional superhero story. So he was never going to stick to the archetypes of good versus bad and everyone getting along in the end. This should have definitely set off alarm bells at Warner Brothers when hiring him in the first place, being, maybe we shouldn't entrust all of our really big superheroes to one guy who is clearly not that interested in making a normal superhero movie. But they did, and maybe they finally learnt their lesson when they saw the early cut of Justice League. One of the main problems that Warner Brothers had with Zack is that they gave him too much control from the off. They basically positioned him at the very front of his own starship and just said, go and take all of the rest of the crew with you. And when you've got that sort of mindset in place, it means that you can't really have any other control, any other vision other than one man's. And that's fine when things are going well, but if they start to go off the rails, the whole thing is going careering towards a collision. Now, Warner Brothers were able to get control of films like Wonder Woman by sticking their heels in and saying, no, we're going to do this completely a different way with a different person. But any film that was attached to Zack was going down the more he was going down. And now we come to the final bit. He definitely was going through a personal tragedy. There is never a right time to fire somebody, and maybe after they've just had one of their children die, definitely ain't it. But from an objective point of view, maybe it was a good thing for him to step away. Now, it would be remiss of me to say that, being fired because of a personal tragedy is not fair in the slightest. However, if it's going to affect your work, if it's going to mean that the product that you're putting out for the public is going to be so much lower because you can't focus on that, you need to step away. You need to step away from that project for the betterment of everything. Plus, it's really not healthy to throw yourself into work if you're suffering a personal tragedy. From personal experience. And I mean, when you've got the first cut and all the critical reception to that, you can't even argue that it was right for him to see the project through to the end, because even with a few tweaks and reshoots, it would still be under his vision. He'd still be going through the whole mental head that he was going through at the time. It was best that he stepped away. So this revelation coming out that Zack Snyder was fired by Warner Brothers around that time, it was probably the best thing that could have happened to him. Which is a horrible thing to say. It really is, because obviously if he's going through a personal tragedy, never fun. But still, from a marketing perspective, from where the DCEU has to go to stay relevant as a competitor to Marvel, it was probably the best thing for business. Which is cold and calculated, but that's what they did. And there we go. Those are some thoughts that we have on why Zack Snyder could have been fired by Warner Brothers. Let me know what you thought about this down in the comment section below. Then swing by whatculture.com for more news and articles like this every goddamn day. As always, I've been Jules, you've been awesome. Hit that subscribe and that little notification bell just so you stay up to date on all our shenanigans, and I'll see you soon.